back. I saved an Apache beauty, and she wouldn't let me leave. Armin had always been drawn to quiet places, far away from the noise of the city. The hum of traffic, the crowds, the constant rush of life, it never felt like his world. He preferred the calm of nature, where every sound seemed meaningful and every sight held a story. That morning he had woken before sunrise, packing only the essentials into his worn backpack, a water bottle, some bread, a first aid kit, and his camera. He had heard about the trails near the edge of the wildlife reserve from a friend, someone who said the place was both beautiful and unpredictable. The thought of seeing untouched land, perhaps spotting wildlife in their natural habitat, made his heart beat a little faster. There was a thrill in walking paths where few humans had ever tread, but there was also a quiet nervousness that reminded him to stay alert. As he stepped onto the trail, the ground beneath him was soft from early morning dew. The trees stretched tall, their leaves shimmering as the first rays of sunlight filtered through them. Birds called out in different directions, creating a symphony that made him pause for a moment, just to listen. Bass. The air smelled fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth, pine, and wildflowers. Armin adjusted his backpack, taking careful steps along the narrow path. He had been hiking for over an hour when something unusual caught his attention. It started as a faint, almost unnoticeable sound, a whimper, soft and shaky. At first he thought it might be a rabbit or a small creature trapped somewhere, but the sound continued, more urgent and desperate. Bursts. Armin froze in his tracks, listening closely. The whimpering grew louder, now mixed with a sharp, frightened neigh.
His heart skipped a beat. Horses weren't common in this part of the reserve, especially not wild ones.
Curiosity mixed with concern, and he knew he had to investigate.
Beh. Following the sound, he pushed through some thick bushes, careful not to trip on the roots that twisted across the ground. Every step made the whimpering clearer. Bess. Then, as he rounded a bend, he saw her, a magnificent horse, with a coat that glistened like polished bronze, and eyes wide with fear. She was caught in a fence. One of her legs twisted awkwardly beneath her. Blood had begun to seep from a cut, staining the dry earth. Armin's stomach clenched. He had seen animals in distress before, but there was something about this horse, something proud and untamed yet vulnerable, that struck him deeply. Burrs. He took a careful step closer, raising his hands slowly. "Easy," he whispered, hoping she would understand. The horse flinched, pulling back as far as the fence allowed. Armin realized that rushing her could make things worse. Patience would be the key. He crouched slightly, speaking in soft, calm tones, moving one hand to brush the brush of leaves gently aside. He could see the dirt matted into her fur, the trembling of her muscles as fear and pain mixed. Armin's mind raced. He had some knowledge of first aid, mostly from reading and watching videos, but this was real life and mistakes could be dangerous for both of them. Armin slowly unpacked his small first aid kit. He retrieved a clean cloth, dipping it in his water bottle to moisten it.
"I won't hurt you," he murmured again.
The horse's ears twitched, her nostrils flaring as she smelled the water and the human nearby. She seemed to sense his calm determination, though her body remained tense. Berman carefully pressed the cloth against the wound, cleaning away the dirt. The horse jerked instinctively, but he held steady, speaking softly. It was a delicate balance. Any sudden movement could frighten her further, but too slow a motion might allow the bleeding to worsen. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Armin's arms ached. His hands scraped against the wire of the fence, but he did not give up. Finally, he managed to wrap a makeshift bandage around her leg using a strip from his own shirt. The horse shifted, testing the bandage carefully, then seemed to relax just a little. Relief washed over him, but it was brief. He knew this was only the beginning. She could not stay trapped here forever, and he could not carry her on his own. Yet leaving her now was unthinkable. He looked around, searching for a way to free her without causing further harm. But the fence was old and weak in places. With careful precision, he began loosening the wires, talking to her the entire time. Slowly, the tension in her body eased, and she allowed him to guide her out. Once free, she took a tentative step, testing her leg. She was wobbly, unsure, but alive. Armin smiled, feeling a surge of triumph mixed with awe. Despite her fear and pain, she had trusted him enough to let him help. For a moment, they just stood there, facing each other in silence. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the bond that had formed in those first few minutes. Armin knelt slightly, reaching out to stroke her neck band. The horse leaned into his touch, her warmth and strength comforting him in return. In that quiet, magical moment, he understood something profound. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a meeting of spirits, a connection that defied words. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the trees, Armin knew he couldn't leave just yet. He gathered some dry leaves and small branches to create a temporary rest spot for her, offering water from his bottle. She drank slowly, watching him with intelligent eyes, as if assessing his intentions. Armin felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had come seeking adventure, and he had found something far greater. A life in need, and the chance to make a real difference. Hours passed, birds continued their songs, the wind whispered through the trees, and the forest seemed to wrap them in a protective embrace. Armin spoke to her softly, telling her his name, imagining what it would be like to have a companion who could understand without words. But he wanted to leave, to continue his journey. But deep down he knew it would be impossible to walk away from someone who had already entrusted him with her life.
As evening approached, Armin sat back against a tree, watching the horse graze cautiously nearby.
But he realized that this encounter, which had begun with fear and uncertainty, had transformed into something remarkable. The forest, the quiet, the soft light, all of it had become part of their story. And in that moment, Armin understood that sometimes the most meaningful adventures aren't about places you visit, but the lives you touch along the way. Night fell, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Armin built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid frightening the horse. She stayed close, her head occasionally nudging his shoulder as if offering her silent thanks. Sleep came slowly, the sounds of the forest filling the air, but he did not mind. Tomorrow would bring challenges. He knew that. But tonight he felt a rare and extraordinary peace. The bond between man and horse had been formed in the most unexpected way, and neither would forget it. By the time dawn broke again, Armin felt a new sense of purpose. This encounter had changed him, more than any trail, any view, or any adventure ever could. He had come seeking solitude, but he had found connection. He had come seeking a story to tell, but he had found a life that would shape his own best. And the horse, majestic, untamed yet gentle, stood nearby, a silent companion ready to face whatever lay ahead together. Armin woke to the soft golden light of the morning spilling through the trees. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of wildflowers and damp earth. He sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds chirping, leaves rustling, and somewhere nearby, the soft snort of the horse he had named Sierra. She was still close, grazing cautiously on the sparse grass, her leg bandaged neatly from yesterday's effort. Armin smiled as he watched her move. There was a cautious elegance in the way she balanced herself, a mixture of pride and careful attention to every step. It struck him again how extraordinary this creature was, how she had survived alone in a wild environment, injured yet unbroken.
He knew he had to leave eventually.
There were responsibilities, deadlines, and a life back in the city waiting for him. But as he began to pack his backpack, Sierra shifted her gaze toward him, her deep, expressive eyes following every movement. When he took a step forward, she lifted her head and snorted softly, almost warning him not to go.
Armin froze.
He had expected her to watch him leave, and perhaps return to the wild. But this behavior was different. She was not going to let him go.
Bear. He hesitated, considering his options.
He had read stories about wild horses forming attachments to humans, but he had never witnessed it himself.
And now, faced with a reality, he realized it was happening in front of him. Slowly, he lowered his bag, kneeling down a little. "It's okay, Sierra," he said softly, trying to convey calm and reassurance. She shifted closer, her ears flicking back and forth, scanning the surroundings while keeping him in sight.
Armin could feel the connection between them growing stronger, unspoken but undeniable.
Over the next few days, he discovered something remarkable. Over the next few days, he discovered something remarkable.
Every time he moved even a little away from her, Sierra would follow, moving carefully despite her injured leg. She seemed to understand when he paused or turned back, and her eyes would meet his with quiet determination. Armand began to call her Sierra because of the mountains and hills around them, which reminded him of her wild spirit and strength. The bond between them developed slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, like the way a plant grows unnoticed until suddenly it dominates the garden. Armand had never spent this much time with an animal in the wild. He had grown up around pets, of course, but this was different. Sierra was not domesticated. She was intelligent, cautious, and independent. And yet she trusted him. He learned quickly that patience and gentleness were essential. A sudden movement or loud sound could startle her. He had to approach slowly, speak softly, and always let her set the pace. The more he observed her, the more he understood her moods, habits, and instincts. She had an almost human-like awareness, as though she could read his intentions, just as he could feel hers. One afternoon, Armand led Sierra to a small stream nearby. The water was clear, cold, and refreshing. He knelt at the edge, filling his bottle and offering her a chance to drink. At first she hesitated, watching him closely, nostrils flaring, muscles tense. Slowly she lowered her head and drank. Pale. Armin watched her reflection ripple in the water, the sunlight catching the gleam of her coat. He realized in that quiet moment how rare such a connection was, how fortunate he had been to find her, and how much he had come to care for her in just a short time. Days turned into a week, and Armin realized he could no longer leave. Every path he tried to take to get back to the main road was met with Sierra's quiet resistance. Beyond, she would appear in the distance, her head lifted, watching him, waiting, refusing to let him go. At first, he tried to persuade himself that it was a temporary attachment, that she would eventually allow him to leave, but it became clear that she had chosen him as much as he had chosen her. Their bond was mutual, built on trust, care, and respect. Living in the forest with Sierra was not without challenges. He had to find enough food and water for both of them, protect her from hidden dangers, and keep her calm when thunderstorms rolled in. One evening, a sudden storm arrived with heavy rain and gusts of wind that shook the trees. Sierra grew anxious, her muscles tense, ears pinned back. Armin stayed close, speaking softly, gently brushing her mane, letting her feel his presence. When lightning flashed across the sky, she jumped, nearly tripping on the wet ground, but he steadied her with firm, careful hands. That night they both slept poorly, huddled under a dense canopy of trees, but the experience strengthened their trust and reliance on each other. Armin also learned about Sierra's intelligence and curiosity. She would sniff at new objects, carefully investigate every sound, and sometimes it seemed she even watched him with an almost playful interest. But she followed him when he explored nearby areas, never straying too far, always keeping him in view. He found himself talking to her as he would a friend, telling her stories of his childhood, sharing thoughts about life, or simply commenting on the scenery. It felt strange at first, but the more he did it, the more natural it became. Sierra seemed to respond with subtle gestures, a flick of her ears, a nudge, a soft snort, that made him feel understood. Bend. One day, Armand decided to explore a nearby ridge that offered a better view of the valley below. Sierra followed him, moving carefully across rocks and roots. When they reached the top, the view was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched out for miles, dotted with trees and streams, the sun casting warm hues across the landscape.
Armand stood silently, taking in the scene, and Sierra stood beside him, calm and composed.
In that moment, he realized that this adventure was no longer just about him. It was about both of them, their journey intertwined, their futures connected in ways he could not yet fully understand. He also noticed how protective she had become. When he tried to walk too far ahead, she would stop, watching him, occasionally calling softly in a low, almost human-like whinny. It was as if she was saying, "I am here and I will not let you go." At first, he found it frustrating. He had always valued independence, but now he felt tied to this creature by an invisible bond. Best. Slowly, though, he began to appreciate it. There was a comfort in knowing that someone, even a horse, cared enough to follow him, to insist on staying close, to form a connection beyond words. Armin also began documenting their days. He would take photos of Sierra, sketch her, and write notes about her behavior and the environment. Wanted to remember every detail of this extraordinary encounter, every step of the bond that had grown between them. He knew that such connections were rare, and he wanted to honor it in every possible way. As he wrote one evening, Sierra lying beside him quietly, he thought about how chance encounters could change life in ways one could never predict.
Even as their bond grew, challenges continued to arise.
Bad. Sierra's leg, though healing, was still weak. He had to encourage her to move slowly, rest when needed, and avoid dangerous terrain. On steeper paths, he would walk behind her, guiding her carefully. When he saw signs of fatigue, he would stop, let her rest, and even feed her morsels of food he had brought along. Each small act reinforced their connection. Sierra learned to trust his judgment, and Armand learned to read her signals, understanding when she needed space, when she was alert, and when she simply wanted companionship. By the end of the second week, Armand had come to a profound realization. He had not come here seeking responsibility, nor had he expected such a deep bond. But Sierra had chosen him, as much as he had chosen her. Their lives were now intertwined in a way that could not easily be undone. She had become more than a horse to him. She was a companion, a teacher, and a reminder of the beauty and unpredictability of life. Her refusal to leave him, her quiet insistence on staying close, had shown him a kind of loyalty and intelligence he had never witnessed before.
And so, each day, they continued together.
Armand walked cautiously through the trails, Sierra following at a steady pace.
They shared food, water, and warmth, sheltering together in small clearings when night fell. Their routines grew natural, almost comforting, and with every shared experience, the small victories, the careful navigation of the terrain, the quiet evenings watching the sunset, they strengthened the invisible bond that had begun the day he first rescued her. Through it all, Armand felt a sense of wonder and gratitude. He had come into the forest looking for adventure, perhaps hoping for solitude. And instead, he had found friendship, trust, and a connection that would last a lifetime. And Sierra, The Apache beauty, who had been injured and alone, had found someone who would not leave her. Someone who would care, protect, and walk beside her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Breath. The days had grown longer, and the forest around Armand and Sierra seemed to come alive in new ways. Birds that had only sung distant melodies before now appeared nearby, curious about the new companions in the wilderness. The trees, towering and steady, seemed to watch over them as they navigated trails both familiar and unknown. Armand felt a mixture of confidence and caution. He had grown to understand the rhythms of the forest, the way the wind moved through the trees, the subtle changes in the ground that hinted at mud or hidden roots, and the quiet signs of wildlife. Near bet. Yet, despite his growing familiarity, he knew that the forest was unpredictable. One morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Armand decided to explore a less traveled path he had noticed the day before. Sierra followed him, her steps careful but steady. Her leg had healed enough to carry her weight without visible pain, though he could tell she still moved cautiously, testing the ground before committing her full weight. As they climbed a steep incline, Armand paused to catch his breath. The view from the top was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched for miles, rivers glinting like silver ribbons, and patches of trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. But the beauty of the forest could not hide the hidden dangers that lay ahead. As they continued, the path became narrower, the roots twisting and turning in ways that demanded full attention. A sudden shift in the soil caused Sierra to stumble slightly. Armand rushed forward, placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. "Careful," he whispered, his heart racing. Sierra turned her head toward him, her eyes full of trust and gratitude. Moments like these reminded him of the responsibility he bore, not just to himself, but to her. She depended on him as much as he depended on her presence and guidance. Later that day, they came across a small creek that cut across their path. The water ran swiftly, and the rocks along its edges were slick from recent rains. Armand knelt at the edge, testing the stones to find a safe crossing point. Sierra hesitated, pawing at the ground nervously. He spoke gently to her, using the soft tone that had calmed her so many times before. First, slowly, she stepped onto the first stone, then another, until they had both crossed safely. It was a simple moment, but it symbolized the kind of trust and teamwork that had grown between them. Each step forward required patience, observation, and understanding. As they continued through the forest, Armand began to notice signs of danger. Broken branches, scattered animal tracks, and distant sounds that were unfamiliar. The forest, once a place of comfort and exploration, now held a new element of tension. He had always known that wildlife could be unpredictable, but the thought of encountering something threatening heightened his awareness. Sierra, sensing his alertness, grew more cautious as well. Her ears twitched constantly, her nostrils flaring as she sniffed the air. She stayed close, occasionally brushing against him for reassurance, her presence a reminder that they faced the challenges together. That evening, a sudden storm swept over the forest. The sky darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the mountains, and the wind began to howl through the trees. Rain fell in sheets, drenching the ground and making the path slippery and treacherous. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by the deep rumble of thunder. Sierra shivered beside him, her muscles tense, ears pinned back. Armand wrapped his arms around her neck, speaking softly, trying to calm both her and himself. They found shelter under a dense cluster of trees, the canopy providing some protection from the worst of the storm. Breaths. Yet the ground beneath them was muddy, and the wind threatened to knock over branches at any moment. The storm lasted 4 hours. Armand did his best to keep Sierra calm, gently stroking her mane and whispering words of reassurance. She leaned into him at times, her warmth and trust giving him strength as well. He realized that their connection was not just emotional but practical. They relied on each other to survive. When lightning struck a tree nearby, the horse bolted instinctively, but Armand managed to grab her just in time, holding her steady until the initial panic passed. By the time the storm subsided, both of them were soaked, exhausted, and shaken. Yet, despite the fear and fatigue, Armand felt a sense of pride. They had endured the storm together, proving that their bond was more than a simple companionship. It was a partnership. The next few days were spent recovering from the storm. The ground remained soft and slippery, making every step a careful calculation. Farm. Armand found small streams of fresh water and patches of edible plants for sustenance. He also took time to examine Sierra's leg, ensuring that no hidden injuries had been aggravated by the storm. Paced. She walked slowly but steadily, leaning on him for guidance when necessary. It was during these moments that he realized just how attuned they had become to each other. He could read her movements, her subtle gestures, and anticipate her needs almost instinctively. Likewise, she seemed to understand his intentions, responding without hesitation to his direction or calm words. One afternoon, while navigating a narrow canyon, they heard voices and the crackle of twigs underfoot. Armand froze, signaling Sierra to stay low and quiet. Peering through the trees, he saw a group of men moving cautiously, carrying equipment that looked dangerous. His heart sank. He recognized the signs of poachers, people who hunted animals illegally, caring little for life or safety. Panic surged through him. He had to protect Sierra, and he knew that any sudden move could put them both in danger. Sierra, sensing the threat, pressed herself closer to him. Her nostrils flared, and she let out a soft, low snort. Our man understood immediately. They could not fight. They had to escape and hide. He guided her along a hidden path he had discovered earlier, careful not to make noise. Every step was tense, every movement calculated. The poachers moved past the edge of the canyon without noticing them, but Armand's heart continued to race for several minutes after they were gone. He realized that the forest, though beautiful, was also filled with unseen dangers, and that vigilance would always be necessary. That night, as they rested in a small clearing, Armand reflected on the challenges they had faced. He had entered the forest seeking peace and solitude, but it had tested him in ways he could not have imagined. The storm, the slippery paths, the threat of poachers, all had pushed him to his limits. Yet, through every difficulty, Sierra had been by his side. She had followed him without question, trusted him without hesitation, and relied on him as he relied on her. The depth of their connection had grown stronger with each trial, proving that true bonds are often forged under pressure. Despite the exhaustion, Armand felt a sense of gratitude and wonder. Breaths. He realized that this journey was not just about survival or adventure. It was about learning, growth, and trust. He had come into the forest alone, seeking personal experiences, but he had found something far greater. A companion who challenged him, taught him patience, and reminded him of the beauty and fragility of life. The Sierra, the Apache beauty who had once been injured and alone, had become an inseparable part of his world, her loyalty and courage inspiring him every day. As they drifted off to sleep under the canopy of stars, Armand knew that the challenges were far from over. The forest could still surprise them. Dangers could arise at any moment, and Sierra's trust was something precious he could never take for granted. But he also knew that together they could face whatever came next. They had survived storms, navigated treacherous paths, and avoided unseen threats. Their bond had proven resilient, a testament to the power of trust, courage, and compassion. By the morning, Armand and Sierra had grown even closer. Frustration, Every shared glance, every careful step, and every gentle touch reinforced the unspoken promise between them to protect, support, and trust one another. The forest, once a place of solitude for Armand, had transformed into a shared world rich with challenges, discoveries, and moments of quiet wonder. And through it all, the Apache beauty remained steadfast, loyal, and fearless, a companion unlike any he had ever known. The days that followed the poacher's near encounter were tense. Our man could feel it in the air. Something had shifted in the forest. The birds that had sung freely before were quieter, hiding among the treetops. The leaves and branches rustled differently, almost like whispers warning of unseen dangers. Armand stayed alert, scanning every movement, every shadow while Sierra walked close to him. Muscles tense, ears rotating constantly to catch any unusual sound. He realized how much he had come to rely on her instincts, just as she relied on his calm guidance. Together, they moved carefully, step by step, through a forest that had suddenly become more unpredictable. One morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky with pale gold, Armand noticed signs that the poachers might have returned. Broken branches, footprints pressed into the soft earth, and the distant clatter of metal reminded him of the danger lurking nearby.
His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm.
Panicking would only put both of them at greater risk. He whispered to Sierra, "Stay close, stay quiet." And she pressed her body against him slightly as if understanding every word. Her trust and focus gave him courage. They moved along a narrow trail that led to a clearing where a small stream flowed. The water glistened in the morning sun, but Armand barely noticed. He was too focused on the possibility of danger. Sierra's ears twitched constantly, and every now and then she would let out a soft snort. He understood her perfectly. It was a warning, a signal that something was nearby. Carefully, he examined the area and spotted a faint movement among the trees. A group of men, armed with rifles, scanning the forest with intent. Poachers. Armand's mind raced. He knew they couldn't confront them directly. The poachers were dangerous, and any sudden action could provoke them. He had to find a way to protect Sierra and himself while avoiding detection. Slowly, he guided her into a hidden path he had noticed earlier, one lined with thick shrubs and uneven terrain. Each step was calculated, every sound measured. Sierra moved with him, careful and alert, trusting him completely. Her loyalty and courage amazed him. Even though she was still recovering from her old injury, she had instinctively chosen to protect him as much as he protected her. As they moved deeper into the forest, Armand realized that the poachers were following them, though they were unaware of the hidden route. He thought quickly, searching for a way to distract them. Ahead, the terrain rose sharply into rocky cliffs. He led Sierra toward a spot where the rocks could create a natural barrier. Carefully, he tossed small stones and branches down the slope, creating noise that drew the poachers' attention. The men paused, curious and cautious, and Armand used the moment to guide Sierra through the safer path, keeping her hidden behind thick vegetation. It was a tense, nerve-wracking escape, but it worked. They had avoided immediate danger, but he knew the threat was far from over. The forest grew denser as they moved, shadows stretching across the ground, and the air filled with the scent of wet earth from a previous rain. Sierra occasionally stopped, her head raised high, nostrils flaring as she sniffed the air. Armand understood. She sensed something he couldn't yet see. Then, suddenly a sharp sound echoed through the trees, a twig snapping underfoot. Both froze. Their hearts raced. Armand knew the poachers had found the wrong trail but were still close. Sierra stamped her hoof, a warning to stay alert, and Armand whispered,
Just a little further, Sierra.
"We'll be safe soon." As the afternoon wore on, they reached a small natural clearing surrounded by trees and rocky walls. It was a perfect place to rest, hidden from sight. Armand gave Sierra some water, brushing her coat gently to calm her nerves. He marveled at her resilience. Despite her injuries and the fear she must have felt, she had remained alert, ready to act at a moment's notice. He felt a surge of admiration and love for her. The connection they shared had grown stronger than ever, tested not only by the challenges of the forest, but now by the very real danger of humans who wished to harm them. But the calm did not last.
As night approached, Armin noticed lights flickering in the distance. The poachers were still searching, now carrying torches.
Panic rose, but he forced himself to think. He could not outrun them in the open, but he had one advantage. He knew the forest. He could use the terrain to their benefit. He whispered instructions to Sierra, guiding her to a narrow canyon path he had scouted before. The rocks were jagged and the path was treacherous, but Sierra moved carefully, balancing herself with remarkable skill. Each step was a test of trust and endurance, but she never faltered. The poachers' voices grew louder, closer. Armand felt a wave of fear, but also a determination he had never known. He would protect Sierra at all costs. She was not just a horse. She was his companion, his teacher, and now more than ever his responsibility. Hard as they reached a denser part of the forest, Sierra suddenly stopped, ears flattened. Armin understood immediately. She had sensed something directly ahead. Through the shadows he saw the outline of another group of poachers preparing to block their path. There was no way around them, at least not without attracting attention. In that moment, Armin realized he had to act quickly. He whispered, "Sierra, trust me," and led her to a small, hidden overhang where the ground sloped sharply. Carefully he guided her along the edge, balancing her steps and keeping her calm. The poachers shouted in frustration, searching blindly, unaware of the exact path they had taken. Armand felt his heart pound in his chest. One wrong move could spell disaster. Sierra, sensing his focus and calmness, responded perfectly, moving carefully and following his lead without hesitation. Together they navigated the hidden path that eventually led them out of the immediate danger zone. By the time they reached a safe area far from the poachers' reach, night had fully fallen. The stars above were bright and clear, and a gentle wind rustled the trees. Armin collapsed beside Sierra, exhausted but grateful. She nuzzled him gently, as if offering comfort for the fear they had just endured. He realized in that moment how deep their bond had become. Not just trust or friendship, but something far stronger. Sierra had chosen to stay with him, to face danger alongside him, just as he had chosen to protect her. The realization filled him with emotion he could hardly put into words. In the following days, Armand remained extra vigilant. He knew the poachers might return, but he also knew that he and Sierra were stronger together. They'd developed a routine, moving quietly through the forest during the day, seeking water and food, and finding hidden shelters at night. Armand's understanding of Sierra deepened with every step. He learned how to read her body language, her reactions, and her subtle signals of caution or alertness. He also grew in patience, resilience, and awareness, understanding that survival was not about rushing but about careful observation, thoughtful action, and unwavering trust in one another. One afternoon, while resting by a small stream, Armand noticed something extraordinary: bounds. Sierra had stopped grazing and was staring intently at the forest edge. Her ears twitched, her muscles tense. Suddenly, she let out a soft, commanding whinny. Armand followed her gaze and realized there was a large deer nearby, cautiously observing them. He watched silently, marveling at Sierra's instincts. She had always been alert, but now he understood the depth of her perception. She could sense not only danger, but also the movements of other animals in the forest. Her awareness had become a guide for him, helping him navigate a world that was as beautiful as it was unpredictable. By the end of the week,
Arman reflected on the journey so far.
The forest had tested them repeatedly, through storms, treacherous terrain, and human threats, but each challenge had strengthened their bond. Sierra was no longer just an animal he had rescued. She was a companion, a partner in navigating the complexities of nature.
Their trust had become unshakable, their connection profound.
He realized that sometimes life's most extraordinary experiences arise from unexpected circumstances, and that courage and loyalty can manifest in the most unlikely forms.
The turning point had arrived, not just through danger, but through mutual reliance. Armin had learned to trust Sierra's instincts as much as she trusted his guidance. He had discovered a depth of empathy and connection he had never experienced before. And Sierra, the Apache beauty who had been injured and alone, had shown him that true courage is not measured by strength alone, but by resilience, trust, and the willingness to face the unknown with someone by your side. The forest was calm that morning, a sharp contrast to the storms and dangers they had faced over the past weeks. Birds called cheerfully from the treetops, and the sunlight filtered gently through the leaves, painting the ground in patches of gold. Armin awoke feeling both exhausted and grateful. He had learned so much from Sierra, the patience required to survive in the wild, the trust that forms between two beings, and the quiet strength that comes from facing danger together. But today felt different. There was a sense of peace, a rare moment where the forest seemed to acknowledge the bond they had forged. Sierra stood nearby, her coat gleaming in the morning light. She had regained almost full strength, her movements fluid and confident. Armin approached her slowly, speaking softly. "Good morning, Sierra. Be ready for another day?" She lifted her head, ears perked, and nuzzled him gently as if saying yes. The simple gesture filled him with warmth. Despite all the trials, the fear, and the exhaustion, they had made it through. They had survived together, relying on each other in ways that went beyond words. Armin had begun to realize something important. He could not simply leave Sierra behind. She had chosen him, as he had chosen her. The thought of walking away felt impossible. Each path he had tried to take to return to civilization had been met with her refusal to leave his side. She had proven that her loyalty was unwavering. Bay, and he in turn had come to care for her in ways he could never have imagined. This was no longer just a story of survival. It was a story of connection, of shared experience, of a bond that neither time nor danger could break. That morning, he made a decision. A bad owl. He would stay in the area, at least temporarily, to care for Sierra and ensure her safety. He began constructing a small shelter near a clearing, using fallen branches and leaves to provide protection from the elements. Sierra watched him closely, occasionally stepping forward to nudge a branch or paw at the ground. It was as though she wanted to help, to be part of the effort. Armin smiled at her enthusiasm. She had taught him patience and trust, and now she was teaching him cooperation and the joy of simple companionship best. As the days passed, their routine became natural and comforting. Armin would explore nearby areas to gather food and water, always keeping an eye on Sierra, who followed him loyally. They rested together in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the distant hills, the sky painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple. The forest, once a place of challenge and unpredictability, had become a home, a shared world where both man and horse found purpose and connection. Local wildlife began to notice their presence too. Birds landed near them without fear, squirrels watched curiously from tree branches, and deer grazed in the distance, confident that no harm would come from this unusual pair.
Armin took careful notes, documenting their interactions and Sierra's behavior.
He wanted to remember every detail of their journey, every moment of courage, loyalty, and quiet beauty. He understood that this bond was rare, something extraordinary that few ever experienced, and he felt a deep responsibility to honor it in every way possible. One afternoon, while resting beside a small stream, Armin reflected on how much had changed since that first morning when he had found Sierra injured and alone. He had entered the forest seeking solitude, perhaps hoping for adventure or a story to tell. Instead, he had found something far greater: companionship, trust, and a connection that transcended words. Sierra had chosen to follow him, to rely on him, and in doing so she had become an inseparable part of his life. He realized that life often gives the most meaningful experiences in unexpected ways, through challenges, risks, and acts of compassion. As the weeks passed, Armin worked on strengthening Sierra's confidence and health. He would lead her through gentle exercises, allowing her to explore new trails and reward her with water and food. Breath. Slowly she regained full strength, moving with grace and energy that reminded him of her wild spirit. Yet she never strayed far from his side, always keeping him in view, always acknowledging the bond they shared. It was a partnership built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. An extraordinary relationship that had grown stronger with every shared challenge. Armin also found that caring for Sierra brought unexpected joy. There were moments of laughter when she would playfully nudge him with her nose, or moments of awe when he watched her gallop freely across a clearing, her mane flowing like fire in the sunlight. He began to understand the subtle ways animals communicate: the flick of an ear, the movement of a tail, the tilt of a head. And he felt privileged to experience such intelligence and emotion firsthand. Each day was a lesson in empathy, patience, and understanding, a reminder that companionship could be found in the most unlikely places. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Armin and Sierra stood together on a hill overlooking the valley below. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, bathed in golden light. He felt a profound sense of peace, a realization that this journey had changed him forever. Sierra nudged him gently, and he reached out to stroke her neck, feeling the warmth of her body and the steady rhythm of her breathing. In that quiet moment, he understood that their bond was not just about survival. It was about life, trust, and love in its purest, simplest form. Armin knew that eventually he might have to leave the forest and return to the world beyond. But he also knew that he could not simply abandon Sierra. He would find a way to ensure her safety, to protect her from harm, and to honor the connection they had formed. Perhaps he would stay. Perhaps he would build a life here. Or perhaps he would find a sanctuary where she could thrive. Bekantic. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain: their bond was unbreakable. As night fell, the forest came alive with gentle sounds: the whisper of leaves in the wind, the distant call of nocturnal animals, and the quiet breathing of Sierra beside him. Armin sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a single act of compassion. He had saved her, but in doing so, he realized that she had saved him as well. She had brought purpose, joy, and meaning into his life in ways he could never have anticipated. Their story was one of courage, trust, and the extraordinary power of connection between two beings from different worlds. In the following days, Armin and Sierra continued their routine, moving through the forest, exploring new paths, and resting in familiar clearings.
Each day brought small adventures, quiet victories, and moments of shared joy.
Inspiration. Taking photographs, writing notes, and sketching scenes from the forest. He wanted to remember every detail: the way Sierra lifted her head when she sensed danger, the way she would nuzzle him when he spoke softly, the way the forest itself seemed to welcome their presence. Through it all, Armin understood that life's most meaningful lessons often come from unexpected encounters. He had entered the forest seeking solitude, but he had found a companion who taught him patience, courage, and unconditional loyalty. Despair. Sierra, the Apache beauty who had been injured and alone, had chosen to stay with him, to trust him, and in doing so had changed the course of his life. He knew that their bond was rare, precious, and something he would carry with him forever. As the weeks turned into months, Armand and Sierra became a familiar sight to those who occasionally passed near the forest edge. Locals spoke of the man and the horse who moved together through the wilderness, an unusual pair bound by trust and loyalty. Bang. Armand often thought about how far they had come, from that first moment when he had found her trapped and frightened, to now when they faced each day as equals, companions, and friends. The journey had tested them, strengthened them, and ultimately brought them together in a way that neither would ever forget.
One evening as the sun set in brilliant shades of red and gold, Armand and Sierra stood together on a hill, overlooking the vast forest below.
He reached out to stroke her mane, feeling the warmth and strength of her body. She pressed her head gently against him, a silent affirmation of the trust and bond they shared. In that moment, Armand knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their story was one of survival, yes, but more than that. It was a story of love, loyalty, and the extraordinary connection that can exist between two beings who choose to trust and protect one another. Bah. Armand whispered softly to Sierra. Thank you for choosing me and for trusting me. We will face whatever comes together. Bend. She nudged him again, as if understanding every word, every feeling behind it. The forest stretched endlessly before them, filled with light, shadow, and life. And they stood side by side, ready to meet it all together. The journey that had begun with rescue had transformed into a lifelong companionship, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could ever break. In the quiet of the forest under the vast sky, Armand realized that some encounters change life forever. Sierra had not only survived because of him, but he had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate because of her. Their story was complete in the sense of adventure, struggle, and triumph, but it was only beginning in the sense of their shared life ahead. Beteka. They would continue to explore, protect, and cherish the world around them, bound by a trust and loyalty that was rare, beautiful, and eternal.